In my personal opinion, Superman gets right what Superman Returns got wrong. Both projects were clearly very heavily influenced by the original Christopher Reeve Superman movies, with the 2025 film even using familiar music cues and themes. But unlike that 2006 film, this movie doesn't let its cause be its effect. Instead of trying to recreate the magic of those original films, or tie itself into its previously established lore and identity, this one seeks out an identity all its own, and it does so while wearing that inspiration on its sleeve. Or, in this case, cape. There's definitely a similarity there, but it's not identical, nor is it an attempt to duplicate those movies, just what made them so great. Those classic films definitely had an effect on this current one, from its opening credits to the S on Superman's cape, even little quirks like Lois being a sugar fiend, or Otis getting the last name of Berg, are nods back to that original set of movies. One of the Superman movie's greatest strengths is its cast and characterization. The movie really is an introduction and a character study for a lot of these characters. And believe you me, there are a lot of characters to study. Now, some characters are reinterpreted, but most are very accurately adapted. So let's start off with the star, the Superman from Superman. This movie makes it clear that in spite of his godlike power, at his core, Superman is more man than super. He's often referred to as a metahuman here, and the emphasis in that word is clearly on human. He's not just the summation of all of his abilities, because Superman may be an alien, but he's just as much of a person as everyone else. And I think David Cornsweet really managed to capture that, making for a Kal-El who can be both strong and weak, sometimes at the same time. We see Supes at his most vulnerable here, mourning loss, shedding tears, getting angry. And all of this is done to show, in spite of what some may think, Superman isn't perfect. He can be impulsive and angry and maybe even reckless when it comes to the safety of others, and handling who is putting them in danger. He's a guy who jumps the gun when it means stopping the bullet. He doesn't always have the answers, but he's always doing his best to try and find them. And what I love is that despite coming off as a very human take on the character still never stops feeling like Superman, because his humanity is his greatest strength, and it is on full display throughout the film. Like when he goes out of his way to learn the names of the people that he's interacting with. These aren't just random civilians or potential victims, they're the people he protects. Emphasis on people. And his kindness doesn't just end at the public, it extends to all life. Which is why in the middle of a kaiju battle, he takes the time to save a dog, to save a squirrel. Because life in general is sacred to him. It's also why he hesitates in ending the battle with that intergalactic threat, because he's looking for a way to do it peacefully. He even shows compassion to his robotic guard, holding his hand as he passes. That's in spite of the fact that he is fully capable of being repaired, and allegedly doesn't have any feelings. Even when he's being tortured by Metamorpho, he doesn't try to fight back. Instead, he reasons with him, and when the time comes, he goes out of his way to save his son, baby Joey. This is a guy who heads into a war to save lives with no concern for how it might impact the world. Because the sanctity of life itself is much more important than any politics. Without a doubt, Superman saves more lives in this movie than he ever has in any other. Because that's his primary objective. And we see that juxtaposed with the other heroes of the movie as well, who are often at times too focused on neutralizing the latest threat, as opposed to saving those affected by it. Even in the end, when lives are ended, Superman still continues to honor them, writing about Mali, a man who helped him and lost his life for doing so. When his robotic guard at the fortress makes mention of wanting a name, without hesitation he begins referring to him by his name of choice.
Maybe one day you'll give me a name.
Well, Four's a name.
So is Gary.
Yeah, Gary. That'd be nice.
And despite the notion from his biological parents that he is superior to all those around him, Superman doesn't align with their mentality, because these people are his peers, his equals. The sympathy that he shares, the empathy that he has, that to me is Superman. This is further made clear when the message from his relatives from the stars are replaced by the memories of his adoptive parents. as despite sharing no blood relation, that's still his true family. At the end of the day, Kal-El is a foreign concept to him, because he himself is Clark Kent. His home is in Kansas, not Krypton. And on the subject of Clark's parents, I think they were done relatively well. They certainly aren't the beacons of wisdom that his parents were on the show Smallville, but they're still the providers of his moral fiber. His values come from those who raised him. They don't get a lot of screen time here, but they really make the most of it, especially in that very heartwarming scene in which Clark's Earth father reaffirms who his son is. And I actually like that the movie doesn't depict them as being the sage-like entities that they are in other interpretations, because it makes the words of wisdom that they do share with him mean that much more. And it makes their relationship feel that much more realistic. The truth of the matter is, and I think almost everybody learns this at some point in time, when we come into this earth, we think that our parents are the greatest teachers. They give us all that they have to know. They have the answer to everything. But that's not really the case. At the end of the day, they still don't have all the answers. They're people just trying to make it in the world like everybody else, just with a little bit more experience. When it comes to Clark's parents, a little goes a long way here, and I think they serve their purpose in the plot very well, helping their son through a brief identity crisis and reminding him who he truly is. Now, I know that some portion of the fan base have taken umbrage with Superman being sent to Earth to rule, because traditionally that's not necessarily the case, but this is a change that has a lot of merit to it, and actually adds a lot to the character of Superman, because Superman was never destined to be Superman.
Superman didn't become Superman. Superman was born Superman.
His parents didn't send him down here to save, they sent him down here to conquer. But that's not his nature. That's not who he is. He could very well, probably with ease, take over the Earth should he choose to. That's apparently the way of his people. But that's not his way. And those are not the people that he identifies with. He may be born Kryptonian, but he was raised human, taught empathy and compassion from a very early age. This makes Superman that much stronger. And side note, I also think that this development adds a bit more of depth for future stories. An appearance by characters like Zod or Brainiac would go a long way in future installments. With these Kryptonian-bound villains seeing Superman as a failure in continuing his lineage. And mind you, that's pretty much Brainiac's primary objective already, so I'm really hoping we see that plot play out. So this is a story beat that works well for the story that it's a part of, but it's also one that could very well set up future stories with that same narrative. Plus, let's be honest, this isn't the first time Superman's space parents have been shown to be a little bit less than interstellar. Let us not forget that Jor-El was a bit of a monster in that show Smallville. In terms of Superman's love interest, Lois Lane, I give all the love in the world to previous interpretations of this character, but for me, without question, this is the definitive Lois. From the way she looks, to what she wears, to who she is. This is just the total package. It's everything you would want in a Lois Lane performance. She's a headstrong reporter whose passion borders on obsession. A go-getter that gets it done, no matter where she has to go to do it. She's bright, she's ambitious, she's got attitude, but doesn't come off as too abrasive. I can continue going down the line, but point blank, she just is Lois Lane. And I like that she's a reporter before everything else. That's really true to the character. Being a journalist comes first. Before she's a girlfriend, before she's a friend, hell, sometimes even before she's a person. Like when Clark is flirting with her, telling her that she should interview him, she immediately snaps out of that flirtation and gets out her handy-dandy notebook. An intimate moment between two lovers very quickly became a workload. I should rephrase that. But you know what? The fact that she takes initiative on her own, mans Mr. Terrific ship, leads the Daily Planet staff to safety/danger, is just very indicative of the character. She's kind of become the anti-damsel in distress. Now she's the damsel who's distressing others. What I really enjoy about Lois and Clark's relationship here is that it feels like an actual relationship. It's not picture perfect. Despite clearly caring about each other, they don't see eye to eye on every issue. They have completely different approaches to life. She thinks with her head, he thinks with his heart. She's about ethics, he's about moral. In a way, their differences kind of challenge each other, and possibly make them better or just more well-rounded people. The two actors playing the parts have really incredible chemistry, and this Lois and Clark make for a relationship that you're actively rooting for. This may very well be my favorite version of these two together, and that's including the original Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder versions of the character. Though, that is an admittedly close race regardless. When it comes to Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor, I'm gonna be honest, it's kinda tough for me to judge. We really only get a glimpse of him and his motivations despite him being the movie's big bad. So I don't feel very confident in fully judging this performance until I've gotten to see more of it. I will say, however, that it makes for a very good first impression. This Lex is tactical, he's strategic, his money and his ambition are his only true powers, and he wields them without caution. Despite seeming to have a genius-level intellect, he neglects it in the pursuit of revenge. When tasked with either destroying Superman or saving the world, which he is inadvertently destroying, of course he chooses the former. This one-sided hatred runs deep, and he's not above using every resource he has, and he has a lot of them, to get one over on the Man of Steel. He refuses to accept loss even when he no longer has the choice. The greatest irony is that he sets out to stop Superman because he claims that Superman is destroying humanity, all the while showcasing his own lack of humanity.
They chose him. Let them die. We'll close it from the bunker before it gets to a city I care about.
Lex shows no love to those harmed by his actions. He sees them as necessary casualties in his endeavor of ending the Red Blue Boy Scout. His hatred for metas goes so far that he refuses to label them as people, not recognizing Superman as a man, but as an it. I really like what was done with this character, but I think given the circumstances, there are nuances to this character that we just don't get the chance to see. Nuances that will probably be explored in future installments. I imagine that in the recently announced semi-sequel, which will star Lex working alongside Superman, we might get to dive deeper into that character's twisted morality and motives. But until then, I'm not really getting the full picture of this. I like what I see, but I want to see that there's another side to it. Having said that, I do believe that this is an accurate adaptation, albeit one that feels very surface level for the time being. And that's not a complaint either. For the narrative this movie's trying to convey, it works just fine. I just hope that we see more of this character and that there's more depth to it. On a side note, I think surrounding Lex with all of his lackeys from on-screen and in-panel was very smart. Typically speaking, Lex usually works with 1 to 3 of these interchangeable henchmen at a time, but here they're all together and they're a well-oiled machine. Some of the characters are much more obscure than others, but for the most part these are characters that we usually wind up seeing in Lex's employ. Although maybe I'm a little bit biased here, I will admit that, but I did feel somewhat let down that Otis wasn't a bumbling buffoon. I always felt that Lex would keep a guy like that around just to reaffirm his self-professed superior intellect. I like their dynamic, and I was a little bit disappointed that here Otis was just a guy. I mean, I'm not saying he had to go full Ned Beatty, but I mean, I would have preferred an attempt, but hey, that's just me. Eve Tessmacher is an airhead who might be more head than air. Wait a second. No, that one didn't work. Eve Tessmacher comes off as a self-obsessed, vapid airhead, but she's shown to actually be more than just a pretty face, using her selfies as a way to discreetly fill in the Daily Planet on Lex Luthor's plans. This time around, the character's actually shown to explicitly be dating Luthor, which is not always the case. Sometimes there's a hinted relationship between the two, but it's not fully followed up on. She's usually his loyal secretary and henchwench. But here, while she's his girlfriend, she's a lot less loyal, still having feelings for ladies' man Jimmy Olsen, who we will get to soon, and desperate to get away from her all-powerful beau. This character is actually a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun watching her. One of the people who really needs to be mentioned in this is the character of Sidney Happerson. They went out of their way to make the actor look like the character from the comics, and I just love his line delivery, from the dialogue he's given to say, to the way in which he decides to say it. It makes him very memorable. So much so that I imagine future iterations of Luthor will probably be utilizing this character's services on screen again. That's in spite of the character having a relatively short shelf life in the comics, and really only being around for the late 80s, early 90s. Yet here, he is integral to Luthor Corp. Seriously, the guy's hilarious. Surprisingly missing from Lex's Legion is Mercy Graves. Though I believe the character of the Engineer is supposed to be a somewhat replacement of that character. Though the Engineer is a previously established character from the comics, she's kinda just barely one. She's a very underestablished and underloved character, which makes sense for her to be used here as that's sort of James Gunn's specialty. The guy loves using characters that nobody cares about for the simple fact that nobody's going to complain if he recreates those characters from the ground up. I will say that traditionally the character is much more of a hero, acting a lot more like Superman than Lex Luthor, but like I said, she's not fondly remembered by most fans. Actually, she's not really remembered by most fans at all. Now, not much is known about the character on screen, which is fine as she's seen as an extension of Lex. But the one thing that is certain about her character is that she's very passionate about her line of work, and proving herself to her bald boss. The character is Lex's latest experiment, a crony who willfully allowed him to infect her with nanotech, all to serve as a weapon for Luthor. I also think that this version of the character is both an amalgamation of the first and second Engineer, in addition to being an all-around soft reboot of that character. I don't love it, but I don't really hate it. It works. I wonder what's going to be done with the character in the future, but I enjoyed her place in this movie. Similarly, the character of Ultraman is retooled and turned into a tool in Lex Luthor's arsenal. Traditionally, Ultraman is not a clone of Superman, but rather an alternate universe equivalent of Superman. Whereas Superman is the head of the Justice League, Ultraman is the head of the crime syndicate. But this Ultraman feels much more in line with the character of Bizarro, a nearly brain-dead copycat manufactured by Lex Luthor, which puts this character in a long list of the very unelite, as Luthor has a long-standing history in media of making carbon-based copies of the Red Blue Boy Scout. You got Superboy, a clone of Superman who shares the DNA of Lex Luthor himself. You got Nuclear Man from Superman 4, a man made from Superman's DNA who also happens to have Lex Luthor's voice for some reason. I previously mentioned Bizarro, and I am still leaving several out. So this character's inclusion in this film is kind of brilliant, because he acts as an extension and a proxy for Luthor. Lex can never... Jesus, what was that? Lex can never...
Try again.
Lex can never take Superman on his own, so he always has to find somebody to do it for him. Rather than get his hands dirty, or in this case, I guess his body bloodied, he sends out his henchmen. I also want to note that the Ultraman costume is clearly taking heavy inspiration from the original Doomsday look. I think it's probably mostly forgotten by most. This is one of those references that kind of flies over the radar, because when you think of Doomsday typically, you think of the muscly, bone-protruding Grey Hulk that burst out of that costume a few issues later. But yeah, this is in fact what he looked like when he came down to Earth. My one hope, and it almost feels like a guarantee at this point that that's where the story's going, is that if and when this character comes back in future installments, it's as a fully realized Bizarro. But I think the fact that Ultraman and the Engineer are working beneath Lex is very telling on how he sees the world. He leads a crusade on metahuman hate, but isn't opposed to having them serve under his thumb, because his bigotry comes with an asterisk. He only hates what he can't control. Having supers like Superman and Supergirl flying about probably call Lex Luthor's place in the world into question. In his own mind, he's supposed to be the man of tomorrow, not Superman. It's Lex who's supposed to constantly be in the news and on magazines. Maybe it's in part due to jealousy, but I think it's also in part due to fear. Because when he goes on TV admitting to being scared of Superman, yeah, I'm sure he's playing it up for the cameras, trying to drive home that anti-mutant rhetoric, but I'm also sure that it comes from a very real place. Lex doesn't mind having these metas work under him, because in his mind, that's where they belong, beneath him, under his control. They're not people, they're walking weapons of mass destruction. And as long as he's the one with his finger on the kill switch, then all is right in the world. On the subject of the movie's Lex Luthor, I feel very similarly to the movie's Jimmy Olsen. In the grand scheme of things, it feels like it's a little bit lacking. Not in terms of performance or writing, just that he wasn't given a whole lot of screen time to shine. Still, I need to commend this movie on giving him an actual side plot, as typically the character is usually used on the big screen to fill out office space. This Jimmy Olsen looks and feels on brand. Some fans have questioned making him an unwitting ladies' man, as Jimmy's typically depicted as the nerdiest of all nerds. But the thing is, while the comics don't specifically address him as such, more often than not, Jimmy finds himself in all kinds of relationships with all kinds of women. I don't know if there's a name for this trope, there probably should be, but what we see often is that the guy who's supposed to never get the girl in media is the one who's constantly getting the girl in media. It almost acts like a revolving door. Whether that be comics, TV shows, or long-running movie franchises, it happens all the time. And I think that this happens very often because it's most interesting. So in that same vein, Jimmy has always been given a girlfriend who usually wasn't quite his speed. All this movie did was take that accidental reoccurring gag and turn it into a character's trait. And you know what? I'm here for it. Like I said, much like Luthor himself, we don't get a whole lot of time with him. And we get even less time to see him interact with Superman. So it's questionable if he's still Superman's buddy in this line of films. Or maybe that's a development that will happen much later on. I can say the same thing about the rest of the Daily Planet as well. A lot of the side characters don't get a lot of time. But everyone still gets their time, if that makes any sense. While we don't know a lot about a lot of these characters, we don't know them incredibly intimately, there's no denying there's a dynamic between the people of the Daily Planet. Cat Grant feels like Cat Grant, Perry White feels enough like Perry White, chomping through cigars, looking like he's about to chew through the scenery. The guy does feel a lot like Perry White, but he feels a little bit more tame than the Perry performances I'm used to seeing. So I don't know if we're going for a more grounded version of this character, or if the Chief just didn't get enough time to really explode. Regardless, this is a giant step up from his predecessor, who just never came across as that character in spite of how good the actor playing him was. Cat Grant is a gossip who likes to talk, and Ron's just kind of there. I don't really remember him having any lines. I'm sure he did when they were filming, but they didn't make the cutting room floor for whatever reason. But on that note, has there ever been a more perfect casting for a minor role than Beck Bennett as Steve Lombard? He just fits the character in every conceivable way. Sounding like an overly self-confident, arrogant jerk for comedic effect is kind of Beck's bread and butter. These were the types of characters that he'd play often on SNL to perfection. Steve is a crybaby that everyone around him can't stand, but as an audience member, you can't help but love. I have to make mention that in this Superman movie, Superman is far from the only superhero around, as the movie introduces the Justice Gang, a group of heroes that seem to predate both the Justice League and the Justice Society in this universe. Although I'm kinda holding out hope that they wind up becoming the latter later on. Being that they're already taking up residency at the Hall of Justice, I think it's more likely that we'll see an evolution of the team and the brand in future installments. Though I don't think that they'll be going by the Super Friends anytime soon. Actually, the more that I think about it, they feel more like a representation of the Justice League International than anything else. Especially considering that little bit of the mural we wind up seeing on the wall. One of this movie's standout stars has to be Nathan Fillion. He plays the Green Lantern with a bad attitude and an even worse haircut. This casting is a very interesting one, as the actor was fan cast as Green Lantern for years by fans. Although, fans wanted to see him act as Hal Jordan, not Guy Gardner. And also, Hal Jordan would wind up being a part that he would play several times in animation. Fillion plays Guy as the guy you don't want to meet. He's self-centered, egotistical, arrogant, and a lot of the time, it doesn't feel like he has a whole lot of reason to be. He's a good guy, but he's not necessarily a good guy, except when he is. This creates a very nuanced character who does the right thing, but you'll wind up questioning if he's doing it for the right reasons. Still, he steals the show every time he's on screen, and has very quickly become a lot of people's favorite character from the movie. He's fun to hate and hard not to love all at the same time. He's exactly what I hoped for in this character, but not what I would have expected out of this actor. I mean, he's great, but I wouldn't necessarily think that this specific role was in his wheelhouse. So I was very pleasantly surprised. I also think that this is one of those cases where it's going to be really hard to recast this character in the future. Likewise, you have Mr. Terrific, A character whose actor lives up to the name, because this Mister is terrific. Much like the character from the comics, Terrific is a stoic genius, a man who uses his intellect and gadgets that would make Batman blush. So, once again, this feels very on brand. But his stoicism doesn't get to the point where he comes off as robotic like he does in a lot of other interpretations. Because despite being someone who values logic over emotion, he's still depicted as a three-dimensional human being. There's a person behind that persona. Someone who can at times get frustrated or annoyed, whether that be by his superpowered company or their superpowered pets. What's great about this is that it doesn't break the character and instead just kind of grounds him a bit and makes him feel more real. I know that's a phrase that I've been using a lot, but I mean it each and every time. This movie does an incredible job of not making everything feel legitimate, like these things clearly couldn't happen in our world, but the people in these movies feel like legitimate people that you would find in the real world, superpowers aside. Last, and unfortunately certainly least from the Justice Gang, is Hawkgirl, who is fine, I guess. She mostly feels bored and indifferent to the going-ons of her colleagues, but does seem to show some passion for the actual fighting part of crime fighting. There's not a whole lot to say about this character. The Justice Gang in general are a small part of this movie, and she's probably the smallest role in that small group, with the smallest amount of screen time. She comes off more like an annoyed teenager than a hero. And that's not necessarily the character, but it is at least an interesting character that you could do something with. So there's not a lot to discuss or dissect here. Again, this is something I think is fine, given that she's not a primary player. There's plenty of time in the future to build on this blueprint, and it's a fine enough blueprint on its own. Now, while Hawkgirl doesn't have a huge role in this movie, she does still have a big effect on the DCU as a whole. As after all, much like Superman, she takes matters into her own hands at the end of the movie. Unlike Superman, she ends the life of the corrupt Moravian president, the leader of a country that, despite its current corruption, was allied with the United States. So this makes way for a lot more metahuman hate going forward, and even leads to the government trying to step in. Rick Flag Sr., who was originally seen to be in support of metahumans, maybe in part due to him working alongside them in Creature Commandos, ends this movie with the newfound cynicism toward them, which I imagine is a narrative that we'll see furthered in future installments in this universe. Then there's Metamorpho, who looks a lot like the character from the comics, but feels a lot more like the actor portraying him. Anthony Carrigan is a fantastic actor that seems to apply his personality into each new performance. They're not all identical, but they always do share a certain likability and charm, even when they're not supposed to be likable or charming. When he's playing characters like Victor Zsasz in Gotham, he's somebody you're supposed to fear, but you can't help but love him just a little bit. I'm serious, this guy is too likable for his own good. And that's very much still the case here. Even when the Element Man is out of his element, forced to play the part of a villain, he does so begrudgingly, and you can tell that his heart isn't really in it. It hurts him. He's a good guy forced to do bad things, all in an effort to save his son. But despite this, his humanity breaks through, and he manages to save our titular hero and his own family by doing so. And later on, when there's a call to action, he helps out the Justice Gang, becoming an official member by backing Guy Gardner up, which is a sweet ending for the soon-to-be hero, getting to see him use his powers for good and becoming accepted as a part of a team. Those Baby Joey scenes are really just heartbreaking. That is the saddest CGI baby I have ever seen. And I don't mean in a Son of the Mask, The Flash type of way. Even the brief glimpse we get of Supergirl at the end of this was a fun sign of what's to come. Sure, she's a drunken hot mess, but hey, who wasn't in their 20s? And her dynamic with Superman feels very natural, with Superman, her younger/older cousin, looking on in disappointment and concern for his cousin. It feels like a very real relationship between real family members. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at here. There's a certain authenticity that comes with all of these characters and their connections with each other. One of the big changes made to this movie was that Krypto is not in fact Superman's dog, but rather Supergirl's. This is a deviation from previous source material, but then again, so is the depiction of Krypto. As here, he's kind of a mangy mutt with behavioral issues, though he means well for the most part, I think.
could be the hero of tomorrow or the villain.
I like this change because it gives the dog much more personality, and it allows him to be in equal parts a hindrance as he is a help, which is good for storytelling purposes. When Krypto shows up, yes, it gives the audience something to awe at. He's adorable, but he also comes with a certain sense of unpredictability. You don't know if he's going to make things significantly better or significantly worse. And much like how the movie goes about showcasing Superman, it shows that having superpowers doesn't immediately make you perfect. Krypto is a nightmare simply for the fact that he's a dog with gifts too great for a man. He is the world's cutest pain in the ass. And when we see his relationship with his actual owner, Supergirl, his behavioral patterns / problems become all that much more apparent. You know how they say pets start to take after their owners? Well, here it is in real time. Rick Flag Sr. is to the DCU what Nick Fury was to the MCU. He's the original plot thread that weaves through all of these entries, tying them together in some form or fashion. The Senior doesn't have a major place in the story here, but his place in the story sets up for major events in the future. Here he starts off defending metahumans, namely Superman. But by the end, after seeing the Justice Gang take matters into their own hands, he starts to change his stance, siding with the government. Of course, he was always aligned with them, but he wasn't opposed to opposing them on occasion. That seems to change by the end of this. And all of that was without me mentioning the many cameos. Having Sean Gunn show up as Maxwell Lord, being filmed by TMZ to trash his competitor and rival Lex Luthor, Peacemaker on a talk show downplaying Superman, which makes sense for the character, but doesn't really make sense for the status of that character, because even in Peacemaker Season 2, he's not necessarily regarded as a hero, so that was a little confusing. Michael Ian Black is a comedian that I've been a fan of since his Best Day Ever / I Love the 80s days, and here he plays journalist Clevis Thornwaite for a couple of memorable cameos. And of course, you know in these videos I gotta talk about the window dressing. Having the son of Christopher Reeve added into the movie was a really nice addition, with Will Reeve acting as a news reporter, which is also what he does in real life. I've always been a fan of inclusions like this, and seeing the real-life Superboy was enough to put a smile on this nerd's face. Likewise for Smallville's Lex Luthor, Michael Rosenbaum, voicing one of Lex Raptors. These are real passing of the torch moments that silently happen in passing. They don't do anything to take away from the movie, but if you're a die-hard fan, they might add a little bit more to it for you. And when all of this comes together, all of these characters from core cast to cameo, it creates a world that feels very much lived in. You feel like you're tuning into another universe rather than watching a bunch of people perform parts. And I love that. There's a passing reference and visual to an interdimensional imp, which to me seems like it could set up the likes of characters like Mr. Mixelplix and Batmite, who are two very welcome additions in my eyes, but I imagine some of the more serious fans may not like. Still, fingers crossed that we get to see them in some form or fashion somewhere down the line at some point in time. But on the subject of dimensions, the inclusion of pocket universes in this is an interesting one, as it's not only a solid story beat for this movie, but it's something that could be explored in what's next to come. Something that we kinda already get to see in the second season of Peacemaker, though this movie also showcases that the exploration of such comes with consequence, as the antimatter used to power this pocket universe nearly rips the universe it's a part of apart. I give this movie all the credit in the world and all the gold stars. However, it's got a couple demerits to it as well. You see, when James Gunn makes a movie, for better or worse, you can tell that James Gunn made that movie. And I think out of all the movies he's ever made, it's actually probably the least noticeable here. But you could still find traces of his fingerprints on this. Like, for example, the raging mind-controlled monkeys hashtagging on Twitter felt less like a valid story element and more of a way for Gunn to vent about his own near cancellation a few years back. Which, is fine. I mean, he has the right to. It's his movie. But for me personally, in terms of storytelling, it didn't add enough to the narrative to justify it. It feels a little outlandish even for the story that's being told here. And it is the one part of the movie that I sort of roll my eyes at. I think the worst part of it is that the monkeys being controlled by Luthor kind of weakens that plot thread, because I think there's a stronger story there if those complaints and critiques were actually coming from members of the general public. I get that this is to show that Luthor controls the narrative, but wouldn't it be more interesting if there were concerns and hatred from the publics prior to that narrative? Wouldn't that play into the plot a little bit better? Anyway, that's really the only thing I wasn't fond of in this film, and it is such a small part of the story that it's really more of a minor inconvenience for me, if anything at all. Although I will admit, the only other thing that I'm kinda iffy on is the inclusion of the hypno glasses. These glasses make Clark look different to others when he wears them. And my only real issue with this is that this is really the first time where I've seen a Clark Kent that, to me, doesn't look like Superman in thick-frame glasses. When I look at this Clark Kent with his slight hunch, his awkward stance, his goofy haircut, constantly avoiding eye contact, and slumped into his seat, I would never imagine that he's Superman, even if he lords over people like he's Gulliver in the land of Lilliputians. It's similar to how I feel about Michael Keaton playing Bruce Wayne. There is a guy who I would never imagine was behind the bat mask. So it kind of bums me out a little bit that there's like a magical reason why nobody knows that he's Superman. I think that they did a good enough job without adding that in there. I think it was justified already. Again, it doesn't make or break the movie for me. It's just not something I would do personally if I was the one in charge. Which I never would be.
I am jealous.
But real quick, before I go, I'd like to address some of the criticisms some corner of the internet seem to have with the movie. Or, more accurately, with this movie's depiction of Superman. Some people complain that this movie makes Superman look weak, and I completely disagree. Yes, the movie starts off with Superman in peril, but it's his first real loss. For 3 years, he was undisputedly undefeated, and his first loss comes at the hands of a clone of himself, aided by Lex Luthor giving him commands. So, that loss feels incredibly valid. If Superman is having a tough time facing himself, then I think that that should be a testament to his own strength as opposed to his weakness. Plus, if we're being honest with each other here, Superman isn't really a fighter. I know some people are already typing up angry comments, but hear me out. Superman isn't a fighter because he doesn't need to be. His power does all the heavy lifting. He's not somebody who's been trained in combat, whereas in comparison, Ultraman is the same superpowered being that he is, being trained in fighting and with a genius talking in his ear with a cheat sheet. So it makes sense that Superman would lose. On top of that, Superman can't win every fight every time. If everything comes to him so easily, then there's no story to tell. It's not interesting. I don't understand some people being upset that Superman doesn't win all the time. Nobody wins all the time, not even Superman. If you want a story worth telling, then there needs to be threats. There needs to be consequence. If Superman cannot be defeated, then he's not Superman. He's The Rock in all of his movies. And on that note, you see how the last couple of those have gone. Also, side note, I never thought I would hear the word harem used so many times in a Superman story, but here we are. Whether you love or hate it, and from what I can see, it seems like the majority of people have seemed to take a liking to it. You can't deny that this movie made an impact, and for better or worse, made an impression. Being the resident superhero historian in my group of friends meant that I got phone calls from a lot of people wanting to talk to me about the movie. Sometimes from people who have no knowledge, understanding, or care about superheroes wanted to talk my ear off for hours about the movie. I'm not exaggerating. From my comic book loving should-be virgin friends to my comic book virgin friends, everyone had something to say. Even my friends who were self-admitted Snyder bros and weren't looking forward to seeing the movie genuinely enjoyed it after they watched it. I think out of all the quotes I got, the best one came from my friend Strums, who honestly knows next to nothing about anything superhero related. And what he said to me was after watching the movie, it made him feel hopeful. To which I responded, that's what Superman does. Superman is the symbol of hope, the never-dimming light in the face of darkness and despair. Superman is supposed to inspire hope. He is the man of tomorrow because he gives us a tomorrow to look forward to. And I think that statement alone is the greatest testament to what this movie got right. Even if there were things that you didn't like, you can't argue that this wasn't true to the spirit of the source. Anyway, with all that being said, that was Superman, or more accurately my take on it. This video took very long to make. Even the scripting process took a long time to put together. So I really hope it was worth it for you, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I personally love this movie, I love the direction of the new universe, and I look forward to seeing what comes next. And if you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed putting it together, and you'll be joining me in this journey through the DCU, well then let me know in the comment section below by leaving a comment saying,
That is Superman.
I am vengeance. I am the night, and that was V Infuso. Just remember, if you're not tuning in, then you're missing out.
So, if you like the words that came out of his mouth hole, and you too would like to become a V-generate, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, nerds!
And if you're not joining the fun, you're in for one bad day. And you know what they say about having one bad day?
Catch him next time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.